Somewhere in the black, freezing water off the coast of Greenland, there is a shark swimming slowly through the dark that was already alive when Shakespeare was writing his plays. It was born before the telescope was invented. Before, in all likelihood, your country existed. It has been swimming, slowly, for something close to 400 years, and as far as anyone can tell, it is in no particular hurry to stop. Up here, on the surface, we treat death as a rule. Everything ages. Everything runs down on a schedule. You get your decades, if you're lucky, and then the machine wears out. It feels less like biology and more like a law of the universe. But go down far enough, into the cold and the dark and the crushing pressure, and you start to find animals that seem to have quietly opted out of that law. Not animals that just live a long time. Animals that barely seem to age at all. The deep sea is full of things that, by our standards, refuse to die. And the reasons why are stranger, and more useful to us, than you would ever guess. First, it helps to understand just how different the deep sea really is. Most of the ocean looks nothing like the sunny, colorful reef you picture. It's a vast, black, near-freezing wilderness that begins a few hundred meters down and drops for kilometers below that. No sunlight has ever reached it. The pressure down there would crush a submarine like a soda can. Food is so scarce that an animal might wait weeks for a single meal to drift down from the world above. It is, by almost any measure, one of the harshest places life manages to exist at all. And yet it is right here, in this crushing, frozen, lightless world, that life has learned to last the longest. That's the paradox we're going to unpack. Let's start with that shark. It's called the Greenland shark, and it holds a title that sounds made up. It is the longest living vertebrate on Earth. Longer than any whale, any tortoise, anything with a backbone. For a long time, nobody could prove how old these sharks got, because you can't just read the age off a shark the way you count rings on a tree. Their bodies don't have the usual hard structures that record time. So a team of scientists tried something clever. They looked at the shark's eye. In the very center of a shark's eye lens is a core of tissue that forms before it's even born and never gets replaced. It's a tiny time capsule, sealed at birth. By radiocarbon dating that core, they could estimate when the animal came into the world. The results were almost hard to believe. The largest sharks they tested were estimated to be at least 270 years old, with a real possibility of pushing past 400. And here's the part that reframes everything. A Greenland shark doesn't even become an adult, ready to reproduce, until it's around 150. Think about that. There are Greenland sharks alive right now that will not have their first offspring until the year 2170. This is an animal that measures its life in centuries, and treats 150 years as adolescence. So how does it do it? The short version is that it does everything slowly. The deep Arctic water it lives in hovers just above freezing, and in that cold, a body barely ticks over. Its heart beats slowly. It swims slowly, so slowly that scientists once wondered how it catches anything at all. Every chemical reaction that keeps it alive runs at a crawl, and a body that runs slowly wears out slowly. That single idea, slow down and you last longer, is the thread that runs through almost everything down here. There's a strange, almost eerie detail that comes with all that slowness. Many Greenland sharks are effectively blind. Their eyes are often infested with a small parasite that hangs from the cornea and destroys their sight. And it barely seems to matter. In the pitch black of the deep Arctic, where there's nothing to see anyway, an eye is close to useless, and a shark that can't see gets along just fine, drifting through the dark for centuries, scavenging whatever it happens to find. It's a reminder of how different the rules are down there. Things that would be a death sentence for a surface animal are barely an inconvenience in a world with no light and no hurry. But the shark is just the beginning, because it is not even close to the oldest animal we've found. For that, you have to go looking for something far less dramatic. A clam. In 2006, scientists dredged up a batch of ocean quahog clams from the seabed near Iceland, part of a study on climate history. Clams, like trees, lay down a growth line every year, so you can count their age in the layers of their shell. One clam in that haul was unusually large. When they counted its lines, the number stopped them cold. 507. This clam had been sitting on the ocean floor, quietly filtering water, since the year 1499. It was alive before Copernicus said the Earth went around the sun. It survived every war, every empire, every generation of human beings for 5 centuries, buried in the mud, asking nothing from the world except cold water and time. They named it Ming, after the Chinese dynasty that was in power when it was born. And here is the small tragedy of the story. Scientists didn't know how old Ming was when they collected it. To count the growth lines accurately, They opened the shell, and, in opening it, they killed it. The oldest known animal on the planet, 507 years old, ended its life on a lab bench, because the only way to be sure of its age was to end it. It's the kind of detail that stays with you. This creature had outlasted the entire modern age, and its story ended the moment we finally noticed it. Ming survived the same way the shark does. Slowly. The ocean quahog has one of the lowest metabolic rates of any animal that isn't hibernating. It can even hold its breath, in a sense, shutting down its metabolism for long stretches when conditions get bad, riding out the hard times in a kind of suspended animation. And when scientists looked at its cells, they found something remarkable. The tissues resisted the normal breakdown of aging far longer than they should. It's not just that the clam lived a slow life. Its cells seemed built to stay young. And Ming was not a freak accident. Once you start looking, the deep sea turns out to be quietly full of animals measured in centuries. There's a fish called the Rukai rockfish, the kind of thing a deep-water fisherman might haul up without a second thought, that can live well beyond 200 years. There are tube worms, strange pale creatures that live in the permanent dark around cold seeps on the seafloor, planted like flowers with no eyes and no mouth, feeding off chemicals leaking up from the ground. Some of these tube worms grow so slowly and live so long that individuals have been estimated at well over 200 years old, with some pushing past 300. They don't chase anything, they don't flee anything. They anchor themselves in one calm spot and wait out the centuries. In the deep, the whole survival strategy comes down to one thing: patience. By now you might be thinking that a few centuries is the ceiling. It isn't, not even close. Deep on the seafloor, in the cold dark, there are animals whose lives are measured not in centuries, but in thousands of years. Take black coral. It looks like a strange branching tree, and in a way it behaves like one, growing outward one tiny layer at a time. Off the coast of Hawaii, scientists have dated black coral colonies that are more than 4,000 years old. 4,000. When that coral began growing, the pyramids of Egypt were brand new. It has been sitting in the deep, adding a whisper of growth each year through the entire span of recorded human history. And even that is not the record. In the deep waters of the East China Sea, researchers recovered a glass sponge, a delicate glassy structure that looks more like an ornament than an animal. When they estimated its age, the number crossed into a range that barely makes sense for a living thing. Around 11,000 years. That sponge may have been alive since the end of the last ice age, older than farming, older than writing, older than the wheel, the city, and every idea humans have ever had, all of it. While entire civilizations rose and turned to dust up here, that one animal sat in the cold and the dark, growing less than a centimeter a year, and simply kept going. To put 11,000 years into perspective, imagine that sponge could remember. It would remember a world with no pyramids, no written language, no farms, no metal tools. It would have quietly watched the entire human story unfold, from the first wheel to the machine you're watching this on, and it would still be alive at the end of it, unchanged, in the cold and the dark, a kilometer beneath the waves. There is something almost dizzying about a single living thing outlasting all of recorded history, and simply not caring that it did. So we have to ask the real question: why? What is it about the deep sea that produces animals like this, when up here almost nothing lives past a century? The answer comes down to a concept with a quiet, almost unsettling name: negligible senescence. Senescence is just the scientific word for aging, the slow breakdown of a body over time. And negligible senescence means an animal that, for all practical purposes, doesn't do it. It doesn't get frailer with age. Its risk of dying doesn't climb the older it gets, the way ours does. A very old one is, in many ways, just as healthy as a young one. It's not that these animals cannot die. Anything can be eaten, or starved, or unlucky. It's that they don't have a built-in clock counting down. And the deep sea is the perfect place to escape that clock, for a few reasons stacked on top of each other. The first is the cold. Down there, the water sits just above freezing, and it barely changes, ever. In that cold, metabolism drops to almost nothing. And metabolism is a double-edged thing. It keeps you alive, but the very act of burning fuel produces waste, unstable molecules that damage your cells a little more every day. Run that engine hot and fast, like a mouse whose heart races and who lives about 2 years, and you burn out quickly. Run it cold and slow, like a Greenland shark, and the damage accumulates so gently that centuries can pass before it adds up to much. The second reason is stability. The deep sea is one of the most unchanging environments on the planet. No seasons, no storms, no day and night. The temperature barely moves. The pressure is constant. In a world that never changes, there is no evolutionary pressure to grow up fast and reproduce before the next disaster hits, because the next disaster never comes. Up here, most animals live fast because they have to. A rabbit that waited 150 years to reproduce, like the Greenland shark does, would be long dead and eaten. But in the calm of the deep, slow is a perfectly good strategy. There's no rush, there's nothing to outrun. And the third reason is the most interesting, because it's happening inside the cells themselves. When scientists study these animals, they keep finding the same tools: unusually good DNA repair, fixing the tiny errors that pile up in a genome over time, powerful defenses against those damaging molecules the body produces, cells that simply refuse to slow down and quit the way ours do. In other words, these animals aren't just avoiding damage by living slowly. They're actively, constantly repairing themselves, at a level that keeps them close to biologically new for far longer than anything on the surface. Which raises a question we usually skip right past. Why do the rest of us age at all? If a clam can build cells that stay young for 5 centuries, why can't we? The answer, as far as biologists can tell, is surprising. Aging is not really a malfunction. It's a trade-off that evolution made on our behalf. Out in a dangerous world full of predators and accidents, most animals were going to be killed long before old age ever became a problem. So there was never much benefit in building a body that could last for centuries, because the odds of surviving that long were basically zero anyway. It was cheaper, in evolutionary terms, to grow fast, reproduce early, and let the body slowly fall apart later, because later usually never came. Aging is what happens when a body isn't built to last, because nothing expected it to. The deep-sea animals broke that logic for one simple reason. In their calm, predator-poor, unchanging world, later did come. Lasting actually paid off, so evolution built them to last. Now, all of that is about living for a very long time without aging much. But there is one animal in the ocean that takes the whole idea a terrifying step further. It doesn't just refuse to age, it refuses to stay dead. It's called Turritopsis dohrnii, and it's tiny, smaller than your fingernail, a nearly transparent jellyfish that most people would never notice. A normal jellyfish has a life cycle like ours in one important way. It's a one-way street. It's born, it grows into an adult, and eventually it dies. But when this particular jellyfish gets old, or injured, or starved, or simply stressed, it does something that should not be possible. It reverses. Its adult body folds back in on itself and transforms, cell by cell, back into a polyp, the tiny juvenile stage it started from. Imagine a butterfly, at the end of its life, melting back into a caterpillar. From that polyp, it grows up all over again. And it can do this, as far as we can tell, over and over. Aging, for this animal, isn't a dead end. It's a loop. Scientists call it the immortal jellyfish. And while nothing truly lives forever, this one has found a genuine biological loophole in the rule that every living thing eventually runs out of time. What makes it stranger still is that this isn't some rare creature clinging to one hidden corner of the sea. The immortal jellyfish has quietly spread through oceans all over the world, hitching rides in the ballast water of cargo ships, carrying its little loophole with it. There may be countless of them out there right now, aging and unaging in an endless cycle, in harbors and along coastlines you've probably swum near. And we only noticed what it could do by accident, when a researcher kept a batch in a tank and watched, baffled, as animals that should have been dying instead shrank, sank to the bottom, and quietly started their lives over. So step back and look at the whole picture. A shark older than the telescope, a clam that lived through 5 centuries of human history, coral older than the pyramids, a sponge older than civilization itself, and a jellyfish that can wind its own clock backward. The surface world, the world we know, is built on the assumption that life is short and death is on a timer. The deep sea quietly breaks that assumption, over and over, in the cold and the dark where almost no one is watching. And here is where it stops being a strange fact about the ocean and starts to matter for you, because we get old. And for all of human history, we've treated aging as simply the way things are, an unbreakable law. But these animals are living proof that it isn't a law at all. It's a strategy, one option among several, and evolution has clearly found other ones. That is exactly why laboratories are now studying the Greenland shark's genome, the ocean quahog's youthful cells, the immortal jellyfish's ability to rewind. They're looking for the specific tricks, the exact genes and repair systems that let these animals sidestep the breakdown that eventually takes the rest of us. Not to make people live forever, but to understand aging as something with an off switch, a process that can be slowed or repaired rather than a countdown we simply have to accept. Some of the most serious research into human aging and age-related disease is quietly taking its cues from a shark, a clam, and a jellyfish the size of a grain of rice. So the next time you hear that death is just a part of life, that everything has its time, remember the cold and the dark at the bottom of the ocean. Remember that somewhere down there, right now, a shark that was born before your great-great-great-grandparents is still swimming, unbothered, in no hurry at all. Aging was never a rule the whole living world agreed to follow. It's just the deal most of us up here happen to get. And in the deep, in the quiet, some animals simply refuse to sign. If you want to read the real research behind any of this, it's all linked down in the description.